Okay, managing change. So in the last module, we looked at the different types of customers of the quality system. We asked whether your QMS was adequately balanced, such that it was meeting the requirements and the expectations of those three customer types. We talked a little bit in terms of the need to measure the output of the quality system, whether they was actually meeting the expectations of those customers. And in this module, really, we're going to talk about change. And in terms of strategy, if you're going to move your quality system or quality organization up through the maturity levels, there is at some point you're going to have to make some changes. So this module really covers what do we mean by change management and change control in terms of making that journey happen. So these are some of the questions. Hopefully, we'll answer at the end of this module. Is your organization managing change efficiently and effectively? Are you actually working on the right things in terms of applying the correct fixes to the right problems? How do you manage your pipeline of change within the organization in terms of what you work on and what you prioritize and resource? And related to that, does your senior management team have really good visibility of the amount of change that's happening across the organization, or does it just think it actually has that visibility? So the first couple of slides, really going to discuss what do we mean by change management. We'll lead on to why this session is slightly different in terms of how it approaches change management. What do we mean by the scope of change in terms of what's up for grabs within the quality system in terms of the remit for change? We'll touch on root cause analysis, which is an important tool in understanding how or what areas you need to actually focus on in terms of how you're going to improve them and the corrective and preventive actions you need to apply. And we'll also come on to some sort of practical aspects in terms of managing change within organizations. So what do we mean by change management, and what do we mean by change management in relation to the other very similar ways we describe change? And I'm thinking really of sort of change control and documentation control. Now, very often when an auditor asks for the change control or change management procedure, they very often are given a document that describes how documents are updated and maintained and stored. And really, that really isn't change management. That's really documentation control. And really, management of change covers not just the way you control changes via actions and processes. It's really how you manage the change more holistically within an organization in terms of how you actually change the cultural beliefs of the organization in terms of all aspects of the quality system and the organization that individuals feel are important. And very often change control focuses on the list of priorities and the list of actions in terms of change control. But really, we're going to cover really a broader concept of management change, where we're really talking about changing the way the organization feels about quality in terms of not just getting things done. Is more a discussion of why are we working on certain things, why are we improving certain aspects of the quality system. And at the top of the pyramid, you've got very often metrics that are very numeric. You could measure the number of actions. You can have spreadsheets, etc., etc. So it's a much more defined area. But as you go down the pyramid, metrics become a little bit more woolly in terms of they're less numbers, they're more feelings, they're more beliefs, they're more feedback from the organization. But as we'll come on to, this is an important aspect you need to manage in terms of change. It's not just the activities on a spreadsheet or a Gantt chart you need to actually manage. It's actually how are you going to change the cultural beliefs and views of the organization that really are the foundation of the whole process. So where would change come from? Now, in terms of the quality organization, it's going to come from a number of directions, and it's primarily going to come from the requirements to meet the expectations of your three customer groups. So from compliance, obviously that changes may be driven by new regulations. So IVDR and MDR recently is a very good example. Lots of changes happening because the regulations have changed or a new standard comes out. The other group of change will be business health in terms of Obviously, the quality system is deeply embedded and integrated within the manufacturing system, and change may be driven by the need to improve the efficiency of the business, to ensure its viability, and basically ensure that the shareholders get their reward in terms of recompense. So there may be a degree of change that happens just to improve the ability of the quality system to function. And the final group is the customers may drive change in terms of their expectations of your product or your service may change, and you may need to make changes within your organization or your quality system to better sort of to react to that. And then maybe change, technology changes, and basically you need to sort of move with the times in terms of how you use technology. You may need to reduce risk in terms of some of the technology may help you reduce risk to the customer and the patient. And it just come from the customers have different requirements of your product and service, and their needs have changed, and you're going to have to pivot your organization to actually meet those expectations. Now, if you Google change management, you get a lot of hits. And there's a massive advice out there in terms of change management, in terms of it's help out there. So this isn't intended to replace all that body of information that's in the public domain. So in many respects, there's so much help out there in terms of how you manage change, and advice from experts and practitioners how to better manage change. So this session really differs in the material around change management in two really quite important ways. It really, a lot of the change management and change control and that sort of advice out there talks about the mechanics of how you make change happen. But this session is different in it actually asks a preceding question: is are you fixing the right problems with the right fixes in the first place? So even before you start going and changing processes and procedures and training, are you actually fixing the right things that you need to? And very often this is forgotten in the energy to go and to make changes and drive changes within organizations. Very often we want to rush ahead and do that, and we don't take a step back and ask ourselves, are we actually working on the right things and solving the right problems? So in this module, we will cover some of the aspects that will help you decide whether they are the right problems. So that we'll talk a little bit about root cause analysis in terms of investigation. We'll talk about the different types of CAPA, because not all CAPA events are equal in terms of their ability to prevent issues occurring or reoccurring, and also how do you prioritize change. And many organizations are very often stuck in this paralysis of they've got so much body of change to actually work on, they struggle to actually manage, what are the important things I need to work on now versus the less important. The other way this module differs in a lot of the advice out there, it actually comes from a very purist stance. It doesn't really reflect, making change within an organisation that's constantly moving, and very often accepted. We may not be in as control as we think we'd like to be. So there are lots of change models out there, and one of the models we'll discuss is Kotter's 8-step model. And it very often infers that the change is driven by the change leader, and they drive the agenda, and they're always in control of events. But in reality, the change leader or the project manager is always embedded in the change process, and we'll cover that more in the session on organizational complexity. And in a very theoretical way, change may seem to be very stepwise and very logical, but actually in the real world, it doesn't happen like that, and many steps happen simultaneously, and obviously the organization isn't static, it's constantly moving and actually interacting with your change event, which is obviously impacting your ability to make that change, and also at times question whether that change you're making is actually relevant or out of date. And a lot of change advice out there doesn't really reflect the real world use of some of the change management the approaches that really don't sort of work in very often real life scenarios. Now, in terms of the models, in terms of change management, they are obviously they're simplifications. So I'm doing them a bit of injustice. They are simplifications of the real world, and they can help, and then when they're roughly right. Um, which is better than being precisely wrong. But the same applies to all change methodologies, be it Six Sigma, Scream, Lean, Scrum, or Agile. Do not use them dogmatically, because the world isn't as ordered as we like. And George Box's phrase, basically all models are wrong, but some are useful, is really quite important in terms of no model fits any organization perfectly at any given time. And there are aspects of the methodology you need to have enough common sense to pull out in terms of how it works in your organization. So we will touch on some of the methodologies when we did in the previous module, but really the message is don't get always bogged down with some of the prescriptive requirements of some of the methodologies, because it will hamstring you in terms of how they actually operate within the real world. So really, the important question really is you need to make sure it's pretty obvious. Really, make sure you're addressing the correct problems, and very often organisations go off and try to fix things and implement changes when actually they're working on the completely wrong problem, and really haven't spent enough time defining what the problem is, and why solving that problem will actually help the organisation and benefit the customer. So really, this part really is really making sure you actually do really know what problem you're trying to fix. And also, what is the scope of the change you're trying to make? Are you trying to fix everything? How narrow is your boundary in terms of your change, your change management endeavor? Is it a fix across the whole organization, or is it focused on one area? Those are the sort of questions you need to ask yourself. And then within the quality organization, there are fairly well defined boundaries between what's part of the QMS and what isn't. So really, your remit as a change leader within the quality organization isn't to try and fix everything. Your job isn't to fix the marketing. It isn't to fix the food in the canteen and the car parking. It is really focused on your ability and your quality organization, and by extension, the quality system. To actually influence whether your QMS is actually satisfying your customers' needs or not. And it really should be focused on data, but a very specific type of data. Really, what we're talking about here is quality data. So quality data is data that is derived from the execution and action of the quality system. And ideally, you need to take quality data, and it needs to be a proactive process. So basically, rather than reacting to events, ideally it needs to be more of a proactive initiative in terms of a process called quality planning. So basically, you take quality data and you decide which areas you need to work on. And then quality planning really is a concept that isn't explained very well in many organizations, but really it is the process of actually taking quality data, identifying quality objectives which align with your expectations of your quality policy, and really driving actions such that you actually maintain compliance with the regulations, but also continue to develop your QMS. And I said it really comes from the analysis of a very specific type of data, some quality data, in order to derive the quality objectives and the appropriate KPIs. So quality planning is talked about in the 13485 standard in terms of requirements for regulatory purposes in terms of the QMS. So under section 541, quality objectives, quality management shall ensure that quality objectives, including those needed to meet the applicable regulatory requirements and requirements of product, are established at relevant functions and levels of the organisation. So it's not all functions, it's the relevant functions and the relevant levels of the organisation, and they're basically those quality objectives should be measurable, and they need to tie in and be consistent with the expectations of your quality policy. So there is clear guidance in the standards of the expectations to quality plan in terms of deriving objectives based on quality data. Now, there is a clear link via a series of steps with what your customer needs in terms of what they think is important with a specific part of the quality system. We call this the quality system element, which generates a form of data, and you can use that data to make a decision, and you can monitor that data to actually derive an appropriate KPI. So really it really starts with understanding your customer's needs and really translating those into, as we discussed briefly in the previous module, translating those into key performance indicators that really do link with what your customers feel is important in terms of value. And really there needs to be a clear connection between those customer needs with your KPIs. So this isn't about measuring as we come on to measure just the activity of the quality system. You really need to be measuring aspects of the quality system which are derived from its output, and those outputs must be directly linked to something the customer feels is important. And we'll explore this concept a bit more. So if you look on the left-hand side of this table, you've got the different customers. So we've got, in blue, we've got the sort of business health aspects of the company. So in the top one, you've got financial profitability, which is obviously the biggest bucket. But business health, the health of the business, the staff morale is an aspect. So you've got, that's an area which is very often covered by human resources. So you got a customer expectation straddling two functions. In the middle orange zone, you've got the compliance aspects or the regulatory requirements of the quality system. So you've got the part of the QMS there is really sort of internal audit and external audit. And in bottom in green, you've got the customer experience where basic customer section where you've got the end user using your product. So that's in the left hand column. In the middle is really the aspects that those customers would deem to be important or valuable. So obviously, from a financial perspective, the financial guys want the scrap to be low. We want waste to be low. We want our production costs to be low. And the section of the QMS that it's related to is control of non-conforming product, because obviously non-conforming product is potentially defective product gets scrapped. So basically there is a direct link between the customer expectations of low scrap and a very specific part of the QMS that you can start to measure. Conversely, in terms of staff morale, adequate resources within an organization that have a direct impact in terms of staff morale, in terms of whether it's good or bad, and there are an equivalent section within the 13485 standard, which talks about provision of resources. So you can see in this table there are direct links between the customers, what they deem to be valuable, and actually very specific sections within the 13485 standard, which you can begin to start measuring in terms of putting some sort of numbers around in terms of whether you're actually meeting those customer expectations, and is that KPI directly linked to something that the customer deems to be important. So this really is the start of trying to break down the customer groups into understanding what they feel is valuable, and then drilling it down into very more specific parts of the quality system. You can start to sort of manage in terms of whether that part of the QMS is actually operating to a level that you want it to. So we touched on, quality data. What is quality data? Again, it's data that is actually derived from the execution of the quality management system. So it's not all the data. It's not all the data in the organization. It's very specific to how the QMS runs and actually operates. It doesn't have to be numbers. It can be non-numeric. It can be qualitative. It can be opinions. It can be feedback. And as we'll come on to that's aspects of data that very often isn't used as much as it could be within organizations as quality data. But very often we focus on things we can measure, and we can draw graphs, and we can draw bar charts, and that's very often the data type we focus on, especially within quality management review in terms of quality data. But in quality system management review shouldn't be all of the data in the organization. It should be very specific to the QMS. Now, obviously, quality data is important because it really measures how effective and efficient the quality system is in terms of its execution and its maintenance and its running. And one aspect many organisations don't pay a lot of attention to is the integrity of that quality data, and it is really critical because you're using that data to actually make very often big decisions about whether your QMS is actually functioning adequately or not. And it's really used to sort of baseline the performance of the QMS and really decide whether you need to improve parts of the QMS in terms of, as I said, deploying those quality objectives. And it is used for the data-driven decision making, and really there really needs to be very specific controls on how the data is collected, presented, analysed, and verified. So in terms of generation of data for quality system management review, you do need to make sure that the integrity of the data is actually checked in terms of cross-checked in terms of is it complete, and we'll come on to is it verified, and is it accurate, because really that use of that data really is used in the process of really using that data on its own is pretty useless. It becomes important when you gain knowledge in terms of how the organisation is behaving, and that then obviously derives action. But again, it really sort of stems from the original quality data, and hence the importance of making sure that data is actually a good solid data to make decisions on. Obviously, if your data is weak or patchy or even wrong, you're going to make the wrong decisions, and you're going to go in the wrong direction in terms of a quality organisation and changes you want to make. So here are some examples of quality data. So number of non-conformances per month, that's quality data. Percentage of product that's scrapped, bottle heights. So even down to sort of very sort of fine detail in terms of aspects of specifications is a form of quality data. There's other types of data that's actually sort of less numeric. It's more sort of narrative, customer feedback in terms of whether customers actually are satisfied or not. Number of change orders, the number of complaints, percentage of production orders completed on time. Process maps are both a qualitative and a quantitative data. So in many respects, within the quality system, you've actually got a sea of data that you can measure, and it's not always the case that all of the quality data links back to something the customer deems to be important. And really, the challenge is deciding what aspects of the QMS operating are telling you important signals of whether the QMS is actually delivering for your customers. And obviously, in most cases, the quality data is actually spread out across the whole of the QMS, and very often it will be in spreadsheets, it will be in files, it will be in different servers, it will be in different databases, and usually to take that data, you have to extract it in some way, and you have to download it. And this is where the errors come in. This is where data sets are mixed up, where data sets are mislabeled, where data sets are absent. So basically, you don't know what you don't know, and there's data missing. Especially the case for manual transcription, where you're actually moving data from one electronic system into a visual format. It's very easy to get that wrong. And so there's lots of room for taking the quality data and actually corrupting it as you move it through the organization. And obviously, the more you can contain your quality data within its own ecosystem, within EcoMS, that does all this data manipulation automatically, then obviously you protect yourself to a degree to corruption of that data sets. And then the final point is really that data set needs to be presented in an appropriate manner that you can make decisions. And generally that's a picture. Generally it's a pie chart or graph or some other way of visually sort of representing that data set. And that's really great for sort of numeric data, but when we come on to the more narrative, touchy-feely, woolly data, very often that is a challenge of how do you present that data, which is as valuable as numbers, but it does offer obviously some challenges in terms of how you present that sort of visually to an audience. So I won't go into this slide, but it's obviously in the handout deck. There are different ways you can present quality data in terms of how you can how you can present it to give a vehicle that you can make better decisions. So there's the various ways of doing that, and they're very sort of standard in terms of quality system management review sort of ways of cutting and dicing the data. You're going to have to look at the data and do some sort of analysis and decision making, and you really should base that on some sort of sound. In terms of numeric data, some sound statistical sort of rationale of why you believe that your decisions are valid, and really that is it should be based on some sort of standard methodology of how you're going to come to a conclusion. Based on the output of that data, so you may require to actually do some further work. You may say, actually, I don't have enough data, or I don't understand this as much as I thought I would, and it may force you to go and either get more data or do some experiments to generate a different type of data. So with the quality data, there is generally a round of data analysis to occur, and it's not always the case that you will have data that's actually ready to make a sudden decision. Very often you need to do some work to sort of unpick the data a bit better to make a conclusion. And I won't go to this slide, but there are standard ways of comparing data sets, so that you basically, the message in this section really is really, if you're going to make decisions based on data sets, it's ideally you should be basing it on some sort of sound mathematical or statistical rationale, and really that you need to look at your quality system management review decks with that eye, in terms of if you make a conclusion, what is it based on? Is it based on hunch, or is it based on some statistical rationale? You can have a degree of confidence, not guarantee, but a degree of confidence that your decision is right based on that data set. Again, this slide really talks to the importance of verifying that the data is accurate, and we've covered this previously in terms of making sure it's verified and make sure it's handled adequately. And the reason being is that it's going to go into a decision forum where you're going to make potentially quite big decisions on the quality system. And really, one of the things you need to check is that once it goes into that forum, that data isn't manipulated any further, and basically you can link the decisions in the QSMR meeting with the data set, and you can create an unbroken line back to where that original data set actually resides. So data verification is not just checking that you haven't transposed it incorrectly or mistakes have happened. There are a number of questions you need to ask yourself when you're verifying data that goes into the decision-making process. Do we have enough data to support the conclusions? Very often you haven't. You've got to go and get some more. Has any relevant data been excluded? Is somebody taken data and said, actually, that doesn't quite fit what I think, and we'll take that out? Have you used the right method to display it? Again, as there any mistakes happen as you transpose the data? Are you using the right statistical tools? Is there sufficient information that you can actually get back to the raw data? Has it been manipulated anyway? And also where is that raw data located? If the factory got burned down, would you be able to replicate that? Can you make that link between the decisions in a really important forum, because the QSMR is deciding whether your quality system is adequate? Can you make that link back to the original data? Is it an unbroken thread, or there are gaps in that thread, and actually it's a bit flaky in terms of you can't really back up the decisions that were actually made. And very often when QSMR is finished and everything's filed away, nobody goes back to that. So really the time to really check that is actually as you're building your quality system management review decks. So you've got this body of quality data, and you've got a whole sea of it. Really, you've got to decide, what are the key performance indicators? And the key word in it is key, because it doesn't mean all performance indicators. And what are the really, what's the short list of things that if you've measured, you would really get a feeling of whether your quality system is actually meeting your customer requirements. But again, you can't use every data type in terms of the quality data, and many organisations get, because they can, display a whole range of quality data. They very often feel that that's better than having nothing, right? And it certainly is. But it's actually you're swamped with so much data. You'll find you won't be able to see the wood for the trees. So really, deriving the key KPIs is a real skill in terms of making sure you focus on things that are really linked back to the customer needs in terms of value, but also they're very limited in terms of you're not measuring absolutely everything. And really, the KPIs are really going to be used to they are the dashboard to decide whether your quality system is actually functioning and moving in the right direction. And it's up to you really to decide based on the quality data, which parts of the QMS need improving, and it's up to you to decide which KPIs you should use to assess the quality system. Now, the KPIs sit in a very particular space in terms of they sort of link what's your overall organizational strategy with the outcomes to measure whether that organizational strategy has actually been effective. Okay, let's look at some common mistakes in setting KPIs. The main one is actually measuring an activity or a status rather than the outcome you want to happen. So on this table, on the left-hand side, you've got a series of KPIs, and on the right-hand side, you've got a more appropriate KPI with really focusing on the customer's expectations. So in the first one, you've got the customer closure rate. So very often, organizations measure the time it takes to close a customer complaint. Now, really, the customer doesn't really care so much about that. They care about whether their complaint was actually closed to their satisfaction. So a better KPI would be the percentage of customer complaints closed to the satisfaction of the customer. Similarly, many organizations measure the number of customer complaints open per month, which is a useful metric. However, customers do not care about your volume of complaints. They care about their complaint. They care about whether their complaint was satisfied, and you answer their issue at hand. And really, does that translate into a better standing of your company compared with others? So, the concept of a net promoter score, would they recommend you to another organization, or would they say to another organization, no, you should not do business with this organization because of these reasons? Similarly, percentage of corrective actions closed on time. Many organisations measure this metric, but a more valuable metric is the number of corrective actions that actually are effective. Not so much the closure rate. You can close something that's very poor and ineffective on time, but the more important thing is, was it actually effective in preventing the issue from reoccurring again? Similarly, scrap. Many organisations measure the cost of scrap. However, that will depend on the size of your organisation. A far better metric is the percentage of raw materials that are scrapped off during production, because obviously that calibrates it in terms of that number. Similarly, headcount. There are big organisations and there are small organisations. A better measure of that metric would be, the turnover of staff as a percentage. Is there a high or a low turnover of staff rather than the absolute number of headcount you have? Similarly, the number of change orders open per month. Virtually every organisation will measure this metric. However, it has no link at all to customer requirements. A better metric is the number of non-conformance that were related to change control. Is your change control process user-friendly such that you can actually execute the process in order to make changes that obviously link back to your customer requirements, rather than the pure volume of change orders at any one time you've got open in any given month. Similarly, external audit observations. External audits, generate observations. So one metric it could be sheerly, you basically measure the sheer number of those observations. A better metric is the ratio of your internal versus your external observations. Are you finding things internally before they're found by external inspectors? That's a more powerful metric in terms of it measures the ability of your internal audit process to actually uncover issues before they're actually uncovered by external agencies. So that's a much more powerful metric than just measuring the number of observations you get externally. So in this example, you can see you can actually, if you put the customer focus perspective, when you start to drive customer KPIs or KPIs, you can put a far more better focus on, are they meeting the customer requirements? Are they linked back to aspects that your customers feel is important and valuable, as opposed to what very often happens is you're measuring the mechanics of the quality system. You're measuring things you can measure. You're collecting numbers, but actually those numbers and those metrics have no link at all with the ability of your QMS to satisfy your customers and grow your business. So really, those KPIs should link with the specific outcomes you actually expect to be able to measure in terms of functional goals, projects, real actions happening. So the KPIs really connect that strategy with your outcomes. They really measure whether your strategy is actually delivering to the customer via the outcomes you expect. So developing KPIs really is a real opportunity to actually build employee engagement. So really, the KPIs are a great chance to connect the organization with the strategy and the direction you want to take the organization in, with specific projects and activities. So really involving the whole organization in deriving these KPIs is really quite important. So in this slide, it really makes a link between some of the metrics in the previous slide in terms of what the customer feels to be valuable, and also links back to the who that customer group is. So really, you should make sure that all of your KPIs, you can actually make a link between what is important to the customer and ultimately has to link back to one of those three customer types that your QMS is actually should be operating to satisfy their needs and expectations. And again, KPIs are really important to decide by the process of quality planning, linking the quality data, the big body of data that is generated by the quality system, to distill it down in terms of a very select amount of data sets that measure the real efficiency and effectiveness of the quality system. And then if those numbers aren't in the sort of direction or the ballpark which you expect and want, really deriving quality objectives and initiatives that will move the dial and move those KPIs in the right direction. Smart, and we've all experienced smart objectives as we define sort of our goals and objectives for the year. They should be specific. Basically, this should be specific to the quality system and the quality organization in terms of linking back to the customer requirements. You should be able to measure them. They should be attainable. You should be able to actually have a chance of actually delivering those metrics. They've got to be relevant to your organizational sort of strategy and the direction you want to take the organization. And there should be a degree of time-based. It's a concept to the metric in terms of if there should be sort of a start and an end point in terms of that. So the same approaches you take to sort of smart objectives during resource planning and resource objectives and appraisal at the beginning of the year. They should be the same scrutiny should be applied to the quality objectives in terms of how you set those in terms of their criteria. And then it's not a one-off activity. You monitor the progress of those quality objectives throughout the year. You're following, basically the concept around plan, do, check, act. And basically, you measure performance throughout the year during quality system management review. But if you only do that once or twice a year, then it's really important that you do it at a cadence that actually you can actually sort of course correct as those KPIs do not move in the direction you expect, or if they do, you can obviously supplement them with other areas in terms of other things you need to work on. But what is important is you need to start measuring the system. Once you've got your KPIs embedded and you've got a system to monitor and measure them, you should be able to react to them and decide whether they're good enough and they're going in the right direction, or actually you need to course correct. Now, most quality systems, as they mature, generally move to a position where they're broadly compliant and they generally meet customer needs. And this status really is maintained by the internal audit and external audit systems. So basically, with time, you inspect compliance into the system, and the audit observations and CAPAs generally move your quality system into a position where they are actually compliant. And obviously, your notifying body that obviously certify your quality system will give you a lot of guidance and help to make sure you do move your QMS into the right sort of compliant level. But then the question is, do you need to improve the QMS any further once you've got it to be compliant and it's generally meeting customer needs? Do you have to continually improve it and continue and make it better in terms of it fulfilling your customer needs? Well, there's clear expectations within some of the regulations in terms of MDR and IVDR that you don't just need to maintain a quality system. There is an expectation that you should also continually improve. So there's an expectation certainly within the medical device and the diagnostics industry in terms of the regulations that the quality system is something that you continually improve and you continually work on. And so really, the especially in Europe, there is a greater emphasis on actually the need to continue and improve the QMS. So to the question, once I've got it good enough, do I need to do nothing else? Well, the answer is no, because there's a regulatory expectation that you actually improve, and also your quality system is being impacted by changes, and the world moves on, and as we'll come on to the complexity module, it isn't a static event, and actually will be. So there's a certain degree of body of work you have to do just to maintain the compliance and maintain the effectiveness of the QMS. And obviously, the more you can improve it, the more you can satisfy those three customer groups. That can only be good for your overall business. So really, the message is going forward. It will be not good enough just to simply maintain a QMS. There is clear regulatory guidance on the requirement to make it better and improve it going forward. So if the quality data is telling you need to improve and your KPIs are, giving you an indication that there are aspects of your quality system you need to work on, how are you going to improve? What's the methodology you're going to use? Now, within operations, there's a lot of structured continuous improvement methodology out there. You don't need to go away and invent a new methodology specific for the quality system. So we've touched on the aspects of lean and process excellence and plan, do, check, act. And one area we'll talk about in a lot of depth in the next module is root cause analysis. So if you've got an issue and you basically want to move a metric in another direction and you've got a problem that needs fixing, how do you decide what the fix is and what the appropriate corrective action is? So in the next section, we'll talk about root cause analysis, and we'll dive into a bit more depth in terms of that methodology.